My dad was a history buff, and so I knew a lot about the American Civil War growing up, and also a little bit about World War II, but didn't know very much about World War I until several years ago. Zach had recommended a podcast where they spend a lot of time, is a history podcast, talking about World War I, and never realized just how devastating and awful that war was. If you've done any reading on it, it's just an astounding thing that, and I think just caught so many people off guard. It was. You say, well, we always think of World War II as a horrible war, and it was, but we didn't. In some ways, we didn't do to people what we did in World War II, even with all those atrocities, what we did to each other in World War I. 9 million soldiers died in World War I. Many died from the battlefield, but also many people died from disease, starvation, and accidents, even while serving. Many more, because of the brutal attrition, came back wounded and disabled. And then after the World War I was over, came starvation of the populace, which made them, in 1918, susceptible to the Spanish flu, which killed between 17 and 25 million people. And it just seemed like it was bad, and then it got worse, and then it got worse. And then, of course, World War I sowed the seeds for World War II. We forget that the countries were still trying to rebuild and get back on their feet when World War II happened and plunged all of Europe back. And that's just a reminder for us that Satan is relentless. And sometimes we understand there is just not any letting up. That Satan is pulling all the world to hell with him. We see that in the book of Revelation, where he says that he knows his time is short. I don't know what Satan knows right now, if he knows right now that his time is short, or if he still is under the delusion that somehow he can still pull it off and keep control over his kingdom. I don't know what Satan's thinking right now, but I do know that he is not going to let up, not on the church, not on all that is good. He's not a victorious foe, but he does not let up when we've had enough. When we say, this is too much for me, Satan is not like some compassionate World War II soldiers to say, okay, we'll take you as a prisoner of war. There are no prisoners of war for Satan, only casualties. Only those that he is relentlessly trying to destroy. And he's always looking for a way to get in, which is why we must, in the words of 1 Peter 5, verse 8, be sober and be vigilant. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 2:11, lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. It's possible that Christians could be overcome by Satan because Satan just never gives up. Now, that's not meant to scare us, but just to be aware of what we're up against. That Satan is, you don't feel like Satan's after you? He is. If you don't feel it, then you are ignorant of his devices, and that's a very vulnerable place to be. I don't think that we should be scared and live in fear, but just be aware that Satan is always after us. And Satan enters big into the book of Job, especially in the first 2 chapters, where we looked at last time that Job is being tempted to curse God. And you remember that we said that the question was, is God only worth loving when things are good? Satan's contention is that God is not worth loving. He's not worth worshiping. Nobody really loves you for who you are, only for what you can do for them. And we said last time that that's generally true for most people in the world. That's very true. They only love God as long as things are good. And so many people, as soon as things go bad, say, why God? That's not fair. I hate you. I don't believe in God anymore. But Job was a special case. And I want to remind you that God's the one that initiated and said, have you considered my servant Job? Knowing that Job would pass the test. But this is not a test of Job as much as it is a test of Satan's theorem. Satan's theorem, again, is God is only worth loving and worshiping when things are good. And so God cannot let that stand and says, knowing that my son, Job, will pass the test, I will let you take everything from him. And we read that in one day he lost 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 1,000 oxen, 500 donkeys, as well as his 10 children and his servants. all of his wealth gone in one day. Despite this, we read at the very end of chapter 1 that he fell down to the ground and worshiped. And in verse 22, in all this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. Now, if Job was one chapter long, what a sad story, but what a triumph. But I said at the beginning that Satan does not relent, that he's not content with one victory or one loss. He wouldn't be content with 100 victories or 100 losses. He's going to keep coming and keep coming. And so we see in chapter 2, first of all, Satan's second attempt. Verse 1 says, again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan, whose name means adversary, came also among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said unto Satan, from whence comest thou? And Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. Now, this is just about the same as the first few verses there in Job 1, verses 6 and 7. It reads almost the same. And then God calls out Satan and says, by the way, you were wrong. You said that if I took everything away from Job, that he would curse me to my face. And you were wrong. He hasn't. Verse 3, the Lord said unto Satan, hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil? That's the same as before. And then he adds, and still he holdeth fast his integrity, although thou movest me against him to destroy him without cause. God calls out Satan and says, still Job holds fast his integrity. Now, just a little side note, God speaks of this, what happened, both as God's active movement, or both as from God's hand and from Satan's. And that's interesting to note because there is kind of an understanding that everything bad comes from Satan and everything good comes from God. And what we see, I can say, yes, that's true when it comes to moral evil. Someone going and murdering, God didn't tell that person to do that, whereas Satan did, but God allowed it to happen. And so everything that happens is by God's either active movement, like in the case of natural disasters. We talked about this last time, natural evil versus moral evil, but also his passive permission. Now, is it better to think this way or not? I think it is to think that God is in control over everything, and even moral evil that happens to us is under his control, and that he somehow even lessens the effects of moral evil. When someone wants to break into somebody's house, it is the protective hands of God, even then, to not allow more dangerous things to happen in that person's life. I really believe that, and I think you have to believe that, because if it's that we believe that God and Satan are two sides of a coin, and we are really hoping that God will win because he seems to be the better one, that is the wrong way to think about trials, problems that we're having, and God in general. Satan, I think, would like you to think that he and God are equal, or at least that God is a little more highly evolved than Satan, but give Satan time, he'll get there. I think Satan would very much like us to think that, but that's not the way that it is. Satan is not on par with God, and God has reasons for allowing Satan to do what he does, even though he says, you moved me to do this. Ultimately, even Satan's movement fold into God's plan. Satan will not admit defeat. And I wrote in my notes as I was doing this, it's a sin to not admit when you're wrong. And Satan doesn't want to admit that he's wrong. So now he has to amend his theory. And so in verse number 4, not willing to say, yeah, I said that if he took everything away, that he would curse you to your face, and he didn't curse you to your face. So Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin. Yea, all that a man hath will he give for his life. But put forth thine hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face. You might as well go 0 for 2 if you're going to go 0 for 1. Now, this phrase, skin for skin, is not an easy phrase to interpret, and the commentators that I read had a real field day with trying to figure out all the different things that it could have meant. I think generally we get the sense, and I'll talk about that in just a moment, but here are 3 probably of the best options that may seem a little funny to you, but hopefully it'll help explain things a little bit. Some people say, you would skin for skin is kind of an idea of what they used to do, where they'd go and trap, or they'd take their cattle or sheep, and they'd use the skin, and they would, make it into a commodity, and they would trade. And the idea with you, when you go out and trap a bear or a badger or something like that, that you are putting your life into your hands to go get that skin, but it was worth it, right? So skin for skin, meaning, we all make risks, but in the end, this is worth it. Some people said skin for skin means, well, if you have like something coming at your face, if you have an arrow or a ball or a stone coming at your face, it's natural for you to put your skin up. You want to save this skin, so you'll sacrifice this skin. So the idea is, well, yeah, we all make trades in life, and Job is willing to lose that for this. And that's kind of the third meaning, is it's a fair trade. My skin was saved. Yes, my children died and my cattle all died. That skin went. But as long as my life is okay, I'm okay. Now, what his theory is that, yes, it's true, and I see that man sometimes will give up his possessions, but his life and his health is more important than even that. So it may be that this one in particular didn't curse you when all his stuff is gone, but if you touch himself, he will curse you to your face. Now, Satan does not know pain personally, but he observes humans, and he observes how much pain affects us. Satan can't admit that he's wrong, but he must go to the next step. Now, he is correct. Once again, he's right that most people, when touched by infirmity, injury, sickness, disease, whether it's genetic or viral or bacterial or some other reason, many people curse God for taking away their health. And so he's right. But that's an indictment on us, not on God. God's the one that brought up Job, and Satan's contention is there's nobody who loves you for who you are because, face it, you're not worth loving. And God cannot let that stand. He knows that Job will retain his integrity even in the face of disease. Now, to ask the question, does this work? And will it work on Job? You already know the answer, but it's worth asking. What's behind this reasoning of Satan that yes, you can lose your things, but to be touched personally, that's what's going to set you over the edge. Will it work? Why should losing our health be different? Let me give you 3 different things about Job's perspective, 3 different ideas about Job's perspective that makes it why this would be a plausible thing to think about. 1, Job's perspective is, I came into this world with nothing, and I'm going to leave this world with nothing. And that's what he said, right? In verse number 21 of chapter 1, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. And I even wondered, because the word skin for skin, the phrase skin for skin, that word skin is the same word for naked. So naked for naked. Maybe Satan was saying, just all the stuff that's in the middle of being naked at birth and being naked at death, all the stuff that comes in between is all stuff that you have and you can get rid of. Everything in the middle is just transient. You can always obtain more. How many of us have lost something and you say, oh, well, I'll just go buy another one? Right? We all had that. And in America, that's especially true, right? Everything's transient and everything is, the companies even now make that so that's kind of a feature where everything's disposable. They want you to get rid of it so you can buy another one. But Job did come into this world with health. That's the one thing he did have. Everything else, yes, he obtained, but the thing he had from early on, as far as we can tell, was his health. And maybe he came into this world with something wrong, but he never knew what that was like to have that taken from him. And in this moment, he's about to have everything, his health, taken from him. And that's a problem. This works for so many people, I think, because we feel like it's something that God owes us. I came into this world. If there's anything that I have that's mine, it's my health. And when that is taken, I'm not owed sheep and camels. I'm not owed a car and a house. I'm not owed everything else, but I am owed my health. That's the way we think. And when that's gone, that really hits us in a different way than it does when we lose our things. There are a few things that we feel that are guaranteed in life, and health generally is one of them. 2, Job's perspective is that God gave and God took away. They were gifts on loan from God, and isn't that the right perspective? He says, again, the Lord gave and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. That's Job's perspective. There was a day he didn't have 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels, and eventually there was a day he did, and he's just now back to what it was before. Now he doesn't have those things. There was a day he didn't have children. Now there's a day he does. And he knows what it's like to not have all those things. Job knows that, so he can deal with this. But again, we take health for granted. It's hard when it's lost to us, and especially when you know that you're not going to recover from this, or at least when you think, I'm never coming back from this. When you don't know, like, is it ever going to be better? Is this now the rest of my life? We have some friends that are struggling with multiple sclerosis, and that is just a process of realizing that your best days are always in your rearview mirror. Now, I know that sometimes it feels like that, right? But even you, in whatever health you are now, you could go out and get healthier than you are right now. Your best days could be ahead of you. But as long as you're healthy, right? You get some kind of diagnosis, you get certain kinds of diseases, certain kinds of injuries, and you realize my life is never going to be the same again. The glory days are behind me. That's a hard thing to face. That's a really hard thing to come to grips with and be okay with. That's why I think Satan sees this so often. It's hard to admit this is the rest of my life. Third, Job's perspective is that what he lost was external, right? Everything was external. Job could still go to sleep that night. Yes, I lost everything. Yes, my children are gone. That's not worth nothing. But he can still go to sleep at night and wake up in the morning, and the pain of grief is still there, but he can at least live his life. And every one of us who has experienced loss can say, you do learn to cope. You don't get over it, a lost child, a lost parent, a lost loved one, a lost spouse. You don't get over it, but you learn to cope. But boy, is it hard when there's a constant reminder of a pain, a disease, something that's debilitating you. Physical pain is always with us. We can't escape it, and it feels sometimes like torture. It's a constant reminder of what God is allowing and what God is bringing. And that's why it's an interesting premise to say, or why is it that Satan thought this would work? And why does it work for so many? Well, for those reasons. Because physical pain, physical ailments are different from losing people and stuff. It's a little more personal. So, how about you? How do you feel about your health? Do you feel you're owed good health or have earned good health? I'll be real honest. I feel like if I had something go wrong with me, I would be somewhat indignant because I'm trying to be healthy, right? Trying to work out. And it's a real bummer when I work out in the wrong way and all of a sudden I hurt my back and I can't do it. I can't do the things. And in the times that it's happened in the last couple of years, I've thought to myself, well, this hurts, but I know this kind of pain from other kind of pain, and I'm going to get better from this. But it's still just a reminder. I can't imagine someone who has to live with this kind of pain every day. I can't imagine that. And talking with a friend, you all know who it is, I'm not going to say, but talking with a friend, and they said, I understand why, you hear about in Canada people that want to have a physician help them end their life. I'm not there, you're not there, but I get it. When you're in pain, when you have that, you say, I understand why people are just like, this is too much, I can't do this anymore. It changes the way you think, it changes the way you look at things. How about you? you feel like your health can become an idol? Do you feel like that's something that you grasp on so tightly that it might, in some ways, overshadow the way that God appears to you in his worth? Does it feel personal when you're hurting or when you're sick? Not just these things happen, but doesn't it feel a little personal when you're really hurt and sick and you ask God a little more pointedly, why? Why this? God allows Satan to hurt Job, but not kill Job. He says in verse 6, the Lord said unto Satan, behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life. And so we read in verse 7 that Satan hits Job with boils. Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord and smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot unto his crown. Everywhere he had these boils. And the word boil is the same word often used to talk about burns, ulcers all over his body from the sole of his foot, which is a pretty tender place. Maybe not for Job. Maybe he was used to walking around barefoot, but he's not going to be walking around a whole lot right now. To the top of his head, everywhere he had burning. Now, we can't say what this disease was because the Bible doesn't say, it just says sore boils. Two of the best options that I could see, one of them was called hyperimmunoglobulin E syndrome, which is also called Job's syndrome. It's eczema and infections, a very nasty thing that will clear up in a few weeks, but it's not very fun to go through. Or it could be, and I'm going to butcher this, hidradenitis suppurativa, which is basically internal acne. It's like painful pimples, but all on the inside. And it just takes it very, very painful. Very, very, something that lasts for a long time, and there aren't a whole lot of treatments for. Now, I don't know. It could be either, both, or something even nastier than that. A viral, a fungal, bacterial, whatever, hit Job, again, over his whole body. And we know that this affected him. In Job 7, verse 5, my flesh is clothed with worms and clods of dust. My skin is broken and become loathsome. In Job 30, verse 30, my skin is black upon me, and my bones are burned with heat. Gives you a little picture about what kind of suffering Job was doing. In addition, the medical reports all say that those who have at least these two boils, and again, I'm not saying it was one of those, but let's just use one of those as a test case. Medical researchers say that both of those lead to depression. You think? We're going to see that in chapter 3 and going on, that this really affects Job. Why is pain so potent? Psychologists say, and you can give her, you can take whatever psychologists say with a grain of salt, but they say that the more that we internalize it, the more painful it is. And they say, have you ever noticed how something that is painful, like really painful for one person, seems to be not such a big deal for somebody else? And there's so many different factors that go into how we feel pain. One is experience. My dad was in a car accident when I was, I think, 10 or 9 years old. Somebody ran a stop sign and hit him and shattered his hip. And I remember going to see him in the hospital, and then he was in our living room and recovering, and he had a fake hip put in, and it kept slipping out, and he kept having to have other constructive surgery, and it was just, this is the rest of his life, pain. And so like when he has something like he hurts his arm, this is not a big deal for my dad. He just learned to live with pain, most of his life. And so I'm a bit of a wimp. I haven't experienced a lot of pain. I don't have a lot of experience with it. So when I'm hurting, I'm really hurting. I don't like it. I hurt my back. Yeah, and listen, I'm so thankful for that. I am well aware. Whenever I go to the doctor's office and they're like, do you have any of these things? I'm like, nope. Praise God, I don't have any of those things. The biggest health thing for me is that I can't see a thing without my glasses. I'll take that over back pain, over hip pain, over knee pain. I've heard about it. 0 out of 10 would not recommend, right? So psychologists say the more that we internalize it, though, the more painful it is. That there's actually some way that you can make it more painful if you just try to bottle it all in. Now, Job's not going to do that. He's going to talk about how hard this is. And so at least he has the right idea. But when pain is constant, you feel trapped and you can't escape your own body. How frustrating to have your mind know what you want and want to do it, and you can't because here it is. This is your life now. Physical pain affects everything in life. It affects your eating. It affects your sleeping. If you're in pain, you can't sleep. If you can't sleep, all of a sudden you're worn down. If you're worn down, then that just makes the pain worse. It makes you more aware. And not just now that you have this, you have everything else going on as well. It affects your relationships. It affects your social status. Say what you want, but people that have some kind of pain or disability in almost every society is looked down in some way, even though it's not their fault. That's just what we as humans have said. This person, there's something wrong with them. No surprise that Job's friends are going to come to some of the conclusions they come to because this is just the way we think about people that are in pain. We shouldn't, Christians especially, but it's the way we think about things. So it affects your social status. It affects your self-perception, and in some ways affects your self-worth. I know we don't like to talk about that, but it's true. You really feel differently about yourself when you're in pain, when you're sick, when you are injured in some way. It feels like torture, and that torture has a personal feel to it. It feels like a personal punishment just for you. And the only relief he can get is verse 8, he took him a potsherd to scrape himself withal, and he sat down among the ashes. He had a piece of broken pot, and he took that, and that's what he would scrape his arms and his legs with, just to get a little bit of relief, just to feel something else. That was one of his temptations. And then verse number 9, his wife shows up. Then said his wife unto him, dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die. Now let's give Mrs. Job a little bit of a break. She lost 10 kids. And she lost all that wealth, and she's watching her husband suffer. And she loves him. He has good things to say about her later. But let's cut her a little bit of slack. She's hurting too. And she's not suffering physically like Job is, but this is hard for her to watch. And she has a suggestion, why don't you just be done? Just be done. Just acknowledge what's going on here. God is being really unfair. Something happened with him where he's just not doing the right thing. Say that, admit it, and then die and be done with all of this. She advises that he curse God and die. And it's just a reminder again that Satan often uses other people to tempt us to sin. When we maybe have our resolve steeled, Satan will bring somebody else, even somebody that we love, even somebody that should maybe know better, and can use them to deliver his messages. Remember when Jesus asked, who do people say that I am, and who do you say that I am? And Peter was the one who said, you are the Christ, the Son of God. And then when Jesus started talking about going to the cross, it was Peter that said, no, you won't go to the cross. And remember, Jesus said to Peter, get thee behind me, Satan. So Satan can use us, and I never want to be used of Satan to deliver his messages for them, but understand it happens. It happened to Job's wife. I don't think she wants him to die as much as she wants him to not suffer anymore. And you can hardly blame her, but this is not the right way to help those who are in pain. I have here a little book. It's called Chronic Pain, Living by Faith When Your Body Hurts. Michael R. Emlet. It's a Christian counseling and educational foundation booklet. Very helpful, very short. You could read this in probably 15 minutes. It's not very long at all, but it's a resource. And in this, it's good for us to remind those who are suffering in pain, first of all, that pain is a chance to learn something new of God. It's not a very fun thing to say, but it's the truth that you can learn more about God through pain than you can't otherwise in some instances. And so it's a chance for you to not waste this opportunity, but to learn about God. It's a chance to remind them that there's glory in pain, that we identify with Christ, and that 1 Peter talks quite a bit about suffering for Christ's sake. And so there's glory that you bring Christ even in your suffering that has nothing to do with persecution or anything. We should remind a person who's in chronic pain that there is a resurrection to look forward to. People that are in pain think about the resurrection a lot more than I do. Job will talk about the resurrection in Job 19. He'll talk about the day he gets to see his Redeemer and how he'll have a new body. And pain makes him think about that. And then we should remind those in chronic pain that we will be there with them in their trial and try to be as understanding as we can. And this booklet talks a little bit about that. Just if you're someone who's suffering with pain, it's just better for you to explain to people, hey, listen, this is what's going on, and this is why. I know you feel like I could probably do this and that, but I can't. And I just need a little patience and grace. And that's good for us then to remember that too. Job's response, he says two things. One, he says it's foolish to curse God. Verse 10, but he said unto her, thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. That's a foolish thing to say. Again, I think he loves her. I think he knows where it's coming from. It's from a heart of understanding, but it's a foolish thing to say. You can't, first of all, change God's mind by threatening. John Gill in his commentary suggests that she's speaking like a heathen, like some of the Idumeans who would, if they prayed to their gods and they didn't get what they were looking for, they would throw their idols out the window or burn them. And it was kind of like, I'll stop believing in you. You better give me what you want or I won't believe in you anymore. And Job says, you know how foolish that is, right? We're not going to get into that game of threatening with God. I'll promise I won't believe in you unless you do this for me. Second, I put in my notes here, the hubris of offering our worship only if the gods will dance. Think about that. God, if you do what I tell you to do, then you can earn my worship. Well, God doesn't need your worship. So maybe get off your high horse a little bit there. Second, then to curse God is to lie and not dwell in reality. If we, in our pain, say something that's untrue about God and curse him and call him unfair and unjust and unrighteous and not understanding our pain, we're lying. And why would we want to do something that would align with a lie? The first thing he says is a foolish thing to curse God. But the second thing he says is that we have to receive from God everything that he gives us. Verse 10, again, what? Shall we, I love that, what? Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? Right? And the idea, again, we receive good gifts from God, and we say when God gives us good things, he knows best. He knew that this is what I should have. And Job says, isn't it just fair that when God takes those things away that we would say, he knows best? Maybe a little less joyfully, but it's the same message. He knows best. And he did this for good reasons. Either way, his character is good, and he gives what is best. Albert Barnes said this, shall we at once lose all our confidence in our great benefactor the moment he takes away our comforts and visits us with pain? This is the true expression of piety. It submits to all the arrangements of God without a complaint. It receives blessings with gratitude. It is resigned when calamities are sent in their place. It esteems it as mere favor to be permitted to breathe the air which God has made, to look upon the light of his sun, to tread upon his earth, to inhale the fragrance of his flowers, and to enjoy the society of the friends whom he gives. And when he takes one or all away, it feels that he has taken only what belongs to him and withdraws a privilege to which we had no claim. Not an easy perspective, but that's Job's, and one that we should all strive for. And again, Job is commended at the end of verse 10, in all this did not Job sin with his lips. Satan was wrong again, 0 for 2. And if it stopped there at verse 10, we could say, what a short, sad, but triumphant story for the glory of God. But there are 40 more chapters of Job, because in verse 11, now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that was come upon him, they came every one from his own place Eliphaz the Temanite and Bildad the Shuhite. There's Bildad, see? Not the one that Jacob married. And Zophar the Naamathite, for they had made an appointment together to come to mourn with him and to comfort him. And when they lifted up their eyes afar off and knew him not, they lifted up their voice and wept, and they rent every one his mantle and sprinkled dust upon their heads toward heaven. So they sat down with him upon the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and none spake a word unto him, for they saw that his grief was very great. We have a lot of things we're going to say to these friends, and Job has a lot of things that he's going to say to his friends. And at some point, we're going to be tempted to say friends in scare quotes. But these are friends indeed. They said, hey, let's all go together. And think about this. They sat with him in the dust, doing the same thing he did, tearing their clothes, sitting in the dust with him. They don't know if this was contagious or not. They had lives that they were going to live, but they came and they sat down for 7 days and 7 nights and didn't say a word. Now that's right. There are sometimes it's good to give counsel. When I do counseling in my office, we don't just sit there and I just kind of don't say anything. I don't sit with them, but there are times to do that. I've learned that as a chaplain, that the very best thing to say when you go in with someone who just found out that a loved one is gone is nothing. They just want someone who's there. And so these friends did the right thing. 7 days and 7 nights, again, all day, not eating, not drinking, just sitting there with Job. And whatever Job was doing, people coming by, I don't know. But at least Job knew, I have people with me. And that is worth a lot. That's great. These friends, as we go through the book of Job, they're seemingly pious. They know something of God. They've had deep thoughts about God. They come to some of the wrong conclusions about what God is doing, but they know him and they know his character. They're old men. They're experienced. They're respected because later on, was it Eliphaz? No, not Eliphaz. Elihu, I think his name is, comes and says, I was waiting for old men to speak, and when you're done, now I am a young man, I'm going to speak. So these were men that were experienced. They knew what they were talking about, and they are his friends. How Job made them, we don't know, but they're more than just acquaintances, more than people who lived in town. They were somebody that Job knew, probably had meals with, and now they're going to contend with him in varying degrees of success. But remember that their whole point is to try to comfort him and help him. Let's wrap things up, and let me ask a few questions and say a few things. What would it take for you to curse God to his face? Isn't that a hard question to answer? You don't really know, right? It's kind of an unfair question when you ask like an atheist, what would it take for you to believe in God? It's not really a fair question because if they knew, they might consider that. Obviously, they don't. What would it take for me to be like, I'm done. I'm done with church. I'm not reading my Bible. I'm not talking to God. I'm done. I don't know. I hope I never find out. I keep thinking about the lyrics from that song, O Sacred Head Now Wounded, where he says, oh, let me never, never outlive my love for thee. I don't ever want to find out what it's like to not love God. I hope I die the second before that happens. But it's worth asking, what would it take? And at least be looking out for the answer. Because there might be something, and it might be coming slowly. It might be something that the Lord would alert to you and say, this is it. This is something that would stand between me and you. Knowing your own fickle heart, that helps, and what you can do to steel against it. It's important for you to understand that that's a possibility to slip away. Better men than you, better women than you, more faithful, more experienced, more knowledgeable in scriptures have fallen than you. And I don't say that to scare you, except to say that Satan's relentless and he's not going to let up. And it's so good for you to know that about yourself, to say, God, like we said this morning, I just want to be next to my shepherd so that he doesn't come for me. It's good to work now to work up your spiritual muscles and that right perspective. Maybe you can't say exactly what Albert Barnes says, but you can get there. You can pray to ask God to shore up areas of weakness in your own heart so that you could have the same response of Job. I hope you never go through what he did, but it's an example for us to be able to say, God, what he went through, you're the same God, and you've given me the Holy Spirit. And so, Lord, help me to build up those spiritual muscles so that I can have the same response as Job. Lord, we are asking this because we know that we are susceptible to the attacks of Satan and that he doesn't let up. We know that greater is he that is in us than he that is in the world, but we just don't know what that's going to look like in the future. And Lord, the one that trusts in his own heart is a fool. So help us, please. Lord, I pray for my brothers and sisters here that they would be well aware of areas of their life that are just not where they should be, and that you, through your Spirit, would help them shore that up and strengthen that part. Help us, Lord, as a church to be compassionate to those who are struggling in physical pain and injury and disease. We might come alongside them like Job's friends did and help them and comfort them and walk with them to be Christ for them. Lord, Job benefited from that. Help us to be that for others. And dismiss us, please, with your blessing in Jesus' name. Amen.